Tiny in All That Air, the Philip Larkin Society podcast.
Hello and welcome to Tiny and All That Air, the Philip Larkin Society podcast. My name is Lynn Lockwood and I am the Deputy Chair of the Philip Larkin Society. On the 9th of August we celebrate Philip Larkin's birthday, which we mark every year in some way. For the 100th anniversary of Larkin's birth in 2022, we recorded over 30 people reading a Larkin poem of their choice, which ranged right across his complete poems. This year, we decided to just read High Windows from start to end in order to mark the 50th anniversary of Larkin's final collection. Before we start, I had a quick chat with our Chair Graham Chesters and Trustee Philip Pullen to talk about some different aspects of High Windows to get us in the mood for the poetry itself. Please note there is some strong language and challenging themes in the collection.
What I've got in my hand, it's going to sound very grand, is a first edition of High Windows, right? I bought this in Scarborough for £15. And I have to say, alongside this first edition were 9 other first editions of High Windows that had been bought by the North Riding College in Scarborough, an FE college. And they'd obviously decided to get rid of them, but and of course they're not worth much because they've got stamps in them and all the usual library paraphernalia. But what struck me was that they obviously thought it was worth buying 10 copies in 1974 when it came out, and of course not because it was on any A-level syllabus, because that. I would say far too early for that. And in any case, it would have been probably too scandalous. But it does seem to me to indicate something of Larkin's popularity, that an FE college in a coastal town to the sea, of course, begins it, that may have influenced it, went out and bought 10 first editions and treated them very well. So that's a sort of claim to fame to have a first edition. What I can't remember, and it's extraordinary that I can't remember, I suppose, whether I bought one myself when I was in Hull and had been in Hull for 2 years, and very distinctly remember it coming out and talking to colleagues about getting their copy. And the only issue was whether Larkin would sign any of them and what tactics might be employed to get him. So I remember it being quite an exciting time on campus the day it came out. And I don't think people reflect enough on this, even the biographies, how extraordinary it is to have a senior figure in the university bringing out a publication, laying all his neuroses out for everybody to see, taking all the flack, if there is any, and just wandering around campus, in his suit and his watch chain. There's something quite surreal about that. And
I've got a first edition that's in mint condition, and it belonged to John Heald, who was the chair of the Betjeman Society. And I took some of his collection when he passed away a few years ago. And I didn't know there was a first edition in there. I think they just asked for donations to charity, and I just committed to taking a box of Larkin books from his collection that I hadn't seen because it was down in Guildford, and when I got it back it was actually a first edition, which was a nice surprise and completely pristine. And he was a huge collector of Larkin, so all my clippings and newspaper cuttings, and I've got copies of the reviews of High Windows from when it came out, were collected by John and put into folders. I owe quite a lot to him. And I feel very privileged to be able to, to have his first edition. It's a really nice link back to him, but I don't use it. It's one of those that I keep on the shelf because I've got probably about 10 copies of High Windows. So I love that cover, that iconic font and the grey and the white and the blue.
The Faber cover, isn't it? That's
the Faber cover, yeah.
Well, my copy isn't as prestigious as either of yours, but I did donate to charity in buying it. My copy is the newer version, which I bought from the Oxfam bookshop in Beverley. Only last year, actually, because I'd lost the previous copy that I bought from the Oxfam bookshop, but I bought it for the conference specifically. But I suppose one of the things that strikes you, particularly in this paperback version, is how thin it is. And thinking about the excitement there was around High Windows coming out in 74, and it's great that an FE College bought so many copies as well. I think that's a really good testament to FE, actually. My own background in FE, I'm very pleased to hear that. But also possibly the fact that it's taken 10 years for Larkin to produce another volume of poetry, and given the success of the Whitsun Weddings, I guess there had been a hunger for more Larkin in that sense. If we go back to that world.
Yeah, I remember at the time looking at the High Windows collection and thinking, I've seen so many of these before. So there was the tinge of disappointment. There's nothing wrong. I mean, all the poets do it, don't they? Publish and collect them, but there was a sort of familiarity about a lot of the poems, which I suppose I was rather hoping there might be more new ones, completely new ones. But
well, that might be a time to resurrect my Beatles analogy, which I remember when we talked about High Windows last time. I think for some reason I was in a sort of Beatles mode. I refer to this being like the Beatles' White Album coming out after Sgt. Pepper, that initially a lot of people found that quite disappointing. But I think from my perspective anyway, like the White Album, the more that I listen to that and the more that I read these poems, and I've read them a lot this last year with our conference being about High Windows, etc. I've grown to like it much more actually as a volume. I wasn't so familiar with all the poems in this particular volume, and I didn't like some of them on first reading, but I think I've grown into it actually now. I'm still growing into it. I thought you might say that, Graham. I had a feeling that this was what your favourite.
There are some that I can't bear to reread. Going and homage to government and forget what did. I can't, make head and the tail of some of them, but some of them are brilliant, of course. Best of.
Yeah, some of our readers talked to me a little bit about their memories of High Windows when it was published. Andrew Motion said he can remember really clearly buying it in Oxford and being very excited to go down and buy it on the day it came out. And Blake Morrison, he didn't tell me where he'd bought it, but he said he'd gone down to the bookshop, taken it off the shelf, read it from end to end with the shop assistant glaring at him. But he did go and buy it, but he just wanted to read it. He just wanted to read it there and then. And he said, so today we're quite encouraged to read books. People don't mind too much if we have a little flick through books in bookshops. There's often
cafes. They put armchairs there, don't they? For you to do just that, really. So it's very different.
It is very different, but I think he risked getting himself into trouble. But he read it all the way through and then bought it. And Anne Thwaite told me a lot about the being present at the launch. And her recollections of that I am going to include, so you'll be able to hear that later in the podcast. I was a bit too young, but it's lovely to hear people's stories of remembering them when it came out.
I wonder, going back to the reactions to it, what people thought about the 4-letter words, because I came across a letter that Larkin had written to Wynne Dawson just after publication. No, it was just before, actually. He wrote to her, I have a new collection of poems coming out early next month. My advanced copy seems full of four-letter words, not at all likely to please a JP. Perhaps you can ban it. And she'd just become a JP at that time. So
Is that like a local magistrate? Is that just
he was a
peace?
local
Yeah.
magistrate. Yeah,
Yeah.
so he must have had a few kinds of concerns of his own about launching some of these poems to the outside world.
I wonder if you gave the Vice Chancellor a prior warning.
Yes.
It's an interesting collection to read out loud. I remember reading that he wasn't too interested in his poems being read out loud. I mean, obviously, he didn't particularly enjoy reading his poems out loud himself, even though, you know, the recordings are fantastic when you do hear him reading. But I think he was more interested in how the poem looked on the page and the structure and the format of the poem on the page. And I think there are some booby traps in these poems for people that want to read them out loud. In Livings, for example, you know, you've got the gaps because he keeps the gaps for the names of the places, like the name of the hotel. It gives it a little bit of an archaic sort of sense, you know, like when you read Victorian novels where they put little dashes in to keep places kind of anonymous. Clarissa, our editor of About Larkin, read that one for me, and she struggled with those gaps and how you deal with those, because it doesn't help you when you're trying to read them out loud. Simon Galloway was supposed to be reading Forget What Did, and then we had an exchange about the word cicatrized.
Yeah. Yes.
He went off and read Money instead. So Gavin's reading that. It's a really odd word. And the word that I can never say is propitiatory. Anne Thwaite can say it beautifully, but at the end of the building, you know, the wheat propitiatory flowers, it catches me out.
Yeah.
He's not an easy poet to read out loud.
No, but it's a pity it's a pity that he didn't feel that he could read his poetry more often in public. And you understand the difficulties he had. But bearing in mind things like that, words that are difficult to pronounce, and given his own, you know, still having something of a stammer that he managed to overcome, but is there in some of the recordings. I think listening to Larkin read that collection of High Windows, which I did fairly recently, added something for me to the whole volume. I mean, it certainly helped me to read the poem I read, Show Saturday.
Yeah.
But because he has a certain way of reading. He has a Larkin-esque way of reading, doesn't he?
He does.
But you get a feeling for where he wanted to put that emphasis in different words. And so I think you need both, really. It's also, it took me back to the written word, because then the difficulty is in a sense kind of interpreting from that written word where you put the emphasis, and certainly with some of those longer poems, you know, where the ending of lines really is from a reading perspective. But you get something else from just simply reading it too, that you get much more of an awareness of how carefully these poems are structured, for example.
And when Cascade, one of our members, was reading How Distant, and I was talking to her about How Distant, and the use of sort of enjambment and the kind of flowing line lengths, the long lines followed by the short lines in between the stanzas. Cass said she found it quite challenging to actually feel like she was getting it in a way that made sense to her and made sense to how she read it. And we were talking about words like melodians, again, are just a slightly unusual word, you know. So it was interesting. Stuart Lee said to me, he felt, so he did Annus Mirabilis, and he said actually he'd thought about kind of practicing, but he felt for Larkin there's a danger that if you try and act it out too much, you kind of spoil it. And so his reading is really quite sort of straight reading. You know, I really enjoyed hearing it. He just let the words sort of speak for themselves.
I think that's another good point, really, though, actually, that, you know, having said there's a Larkin voice in here and that adds something. These poems stand on their own, don't they, too? And them being read in different ways and in different accents is important, and I think adds something in its own right, which is why I'm really, really looking forward to listening to all of them.
Yeah, I agree. The different accents were something that I was really sort of hoping to try and capture. So obviously we've got Dale Salwak and Devon Allison with American accents. Got female voices, reading Kurt Livings, which is obviously a male voice. So I like that kind of difference in age. We've got younger voices and older voices. Carol Collinson apologised to me when I rang her the other day and said thank you for recording the trees. She said, "Oh, don't use it if it's too northern." I pointed out that Vicky Foster was reading The Explosion, and another beautiful northern voice.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Brings so much to the poems to hear that voice.
That voice, yeah.
But yeah, there's a really good variety. And I think one thing I kept coming back to with High Windows was, it's a really good one for evidence that Larkin had this outward looking view of the world. It wasn't all just introspective, because I think two of my favourite poems, To the Sea and Show Saturday, are just these amazing descriptions of English life.
I mean, they've got lots of depth. Both poems have got a lot of depth to them, haven't they? In all sorts of ways, really. Just his incredibly his observational power is very strong.
Yeah.
In both those poems, actually, but particularly Show Saturday, I suppose. That list poem approach he has, which works poetically.
But both of them, I know what you mean, looking out to the English rituals. But both of them are very deeply felt, aren't they? And they're rooted in Larkin's own life, history, or his contemporary habits of going up to Bellingham. And I read the other day that To the Sea, it was inspired by Buddha. I hadn't realized that before, and because you don't get many pictorial references in Larkin. Obviously, Card Players is one, but I realised that To the Sea was trying to capture some sort of Buddhisque feel about it. I think it calls it. Yeah.
Yeah, I gave myself To the Sea as a bit of a treat for myself, because I was in Scarborough that weekend when I recorded it, and I just saw there are some images in there that take it away from being a completely contemporary poem, but there's so much in there that is actually just that opening line about stepping over the low wall and walking along the concrete walk along the shore, and then at the end coming back to the cars, and that whole ritual with the day on the beach. It's just exactly what we do still now, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's lovely.
Do you think those three poems that you've mentioned, that To the Sea, The Building, and Show Saturday, do you think those are the big stakes in the ground for the whole collection? I mean, they're all quite long, aren't they?
Yeah.
I'd forgotten lots of the poems, I have to say. Livings, I don't think I've read for a long, long while. But they don't get anthologized, do they?
No.
Trees obviously does, and nobody can stop talking about This Be the Verse.
No. Yeah, I think The Building, To the Sea, Show Saturday, and I guess The Old Fools as well, just these huge statements. Yeah. Andrew Motion reads The Old Fools, and I was just captivated listening to him. It just takes you on such a journey, that poem.
Yeah.
When the Guardian review in 1974 described the volume's main themes as being disinvolvement, decrepitude, and death, I suppose that poem sums that up. But having said that, what strikes me about it overall now, and particularly actually having heard Larkin read those poems too, is there's a lot more humour in here than you might have thought, given that description in other poems. So there's a lot of variation and a lot of emotions across there. So it's not all of the things the Guardian said it was. Actually.
No.
There's a lot of other things I can really enjoy. I don't enjoy listening to The Old Fools or reading it, but it is a very powerful poem.
It is very powerful. Yeah.
Have you seen the animated film with Bob Geldof?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It's a devastating piece of animation, and And even today, it's still quite a taboo subject, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yes,
Me too.
we will.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I just want to say thank you to both of you for your help, and thank you to all the people that came along and made this happen. And yeah, I don't know whether Faber are going to come after us for some kind of royalties, but you never know. We might do a good bit of promotion. And it's always in print, High Windows, and they put out a new edition in the last year. Nice cover, and people are still buying it, which is reassuring to know.
To the sea. To step over the low wall that divides road from concrete walk above the shore brings sharply back something known long before, the miniature gaiety of seasides. Everything crowds under the low horizon, steep beach, blue water, towels, red bathing caps, the small hushed waves, repeated fresh collapse up the warm yellow sand, and further off, a white steamer stuck in the afternoon. Still going on, all of it, still going on. To lie, eat, sleep in hearing of the surf, ears to transistors that sound tame enough under the sky, or gently up and down lead the uncertain children, frilled in white and grasping at enormous air, or wheel the rigid old along for them to feel a final summer, plainly still occurs as half an annual pleasure, half a right. As when, happy at being on my own, I searched the sand for famous cricketers, or farther back, my parents, listeners to the same seaside quack, first became known. Strange to it now, I watched the cloudless scene, the same clear water over smoothed pebbles, the distant bathers' weak protesting trebles down at its edge, and then the cheap cigars, the chocolate papers, tea leaves, and between the rocks, the rusting soup tins, till the first few families start the trek back to the cars. The white steamer has gone. Like breathed on glass, the sunlight has turned milky. If the worst of flawless weather is our falling short, it may be that through habit these do best, come into water clumsily undressed yearly, teaching their children by a sort of clowning, helping the old too, as they ought.
Sympathy in White Major. When I drop 4 cubes of ice chimingly in a glass, and add 3 goes of gin, a lemon slice, and let a 10-ounce tonic void in foaming gulps until it smothers everything else up to the edge, I lift the lot in private pledge. He devoted his life to others. While other people wore like clothes the human beings in their days, I set myself to bring to those who thought I could the lost displays. It didn't work for them or me, but all concerned were nearer thus, or so we thought, to all the fuss, than if we'd missed it separately. A decent chap, a real good sort, straight as a die, one of the best, a brick, a trump, a proper sport, head and shoulders above the rest. How many lives would have been duller had he not been here below? Here's to the whitest man I know, though white is not my favorite color.
The trees are coming into leaf, like something almost being said. The recent buds relax and spread. Their greenness is a kind of grief. Is it that they are born again and we grow old? No, they die too. Their yearly trick of looking new is written down in rings of grain. Yet still the unresting castles thresh in full-grown thickness every May. Last year is dead, they seem to say. Begin afresh, afresh, afresh.
Livings. I deal with farmers, things like dips and feed. Every third month, I book myself in at the hotel in Ton for 3 days. The boots carries my lean old leather case up to a single where I hang my hat. 1 beer and then the dinner, at which I read the Times from soup to stewed pears. Births, deaths, for sale, police court, motor spares. Afterwards, whiskey in the smoke room, Clough, Margetts, the captain, Dr. Watterson, who makes ends meet, who's taking the knock, government tariffs, wages, price of stock. Smoke hangs under the light. The pictures on the wall are comic. Hunting, the trenches, stuff nobody minds or notices. A sound of dominoes from the bar. I stand around. Later, the square is empty. A big sky drains down the estuary like the bed of a gold river, and the customs house still has its office lit. I drowse between ex-army sheets, wondering why I think it's worthwhile coming. Father's dead. He used to, but the business now is mine. It's time for change in 1929. 70 feet down, the sea explodes upwards, relapsing to slaver off landing stage steps. Running suds rejoice. Rocks writhe back to sight. Mussels, limpets, husband their tenacity in the freezing slither. Creatures, I cherish you. By day, sky builds grape dark over the salt, unsown, staring fields. Radio rubs its legs, telling me of elsewhere. Barometers falling, ports wind-shuttered, fleets pent like hounds, fires in humped inns, kippering sea pictures. Keep it all off. By night, snow swerves, O loose moth world, through the stair travelling leather-black waters. Guarded by brilliance, I set plate and spoon, and after, divining cards. Lit shelved liners grope like mad worlds westward. Tonight we dine without the master. Nocturnal vapours do not please. The port goes round so much the faster. Topics are raised with no less ease. Which advowson looks the fairest? What the wood from Snape will fetch? Names for putendum mulieris? Why is Judas like Jack Ketch? The candle flames grow thin, then broaden. Our butler, starveling, piles the logs and sets behind the screen a Jordan, quicker than going to the bogs. The wine heats temper and complexion. Oath-enforced assertions fly on roomy fevers, resurrection, regicide and rabbit pie. The fields around are cold and muddy. The cobbled streets close by are still. A sizer shivers at his study. The kitchen cat has made a kill. The bells discuss the hour's gradations. Dusty shelves hold prayers and proofs. Above, Chaldean constellations sparkle over crowded roofs.
Forget what did. Stopping the diary was a stunt to memory, was a blank starting, one no longer cicatrised by such words, such actions as bleak and waking. I wanted them over, hurried to burial, and looked back on, like the wars and winters, missing behind the windows of an opaque childhood. And the empty pages? Should they ever be filled, let it be with observed celestial recurrences, the day the flowers come and when the birds go.
High windows. When I see a couple of kids and guess he's fucking her and she's taking pills or wearing a diaphragm, I know this is paradise everyone old has dreamed of all their lives. Bonds and gestures pushed to one side like an outdated combine harvester, and everyone young going down the long slide to happiness, endlessly. I wonder if anyone looked at me 40 years back and thought, that'll be the life, no God anymore, or sweating in the dark about hell and that, or having to hide what you think of the priest. He and his lot will all go down the long slide like free bloody birds. And immediately, rather than words, comes the thought of high windows, the sun-comprehending glass, and beyond it the deep blue air that shows nothing and is nowhere and is endless.
Friday night in the Royal Station Hotel. Light spreads darkly downwards from the high clusters of lights over empty chairs that face each other, coloured differently. Through open doors, the dining room declares a larger loneliness of knives and glass and silence laid like carpet. A porter reads an unsold evening paper. Hours pass, and all the salesmen have gone back to Leeds, leaving full ashtrays in the conference room. In shoeless corridors, the lights burn. How isolated, like a fort it is. The headed paper made for writing home, if home existed, letters of exile. Now night comes on, waves fold behind villages.
The old fools. What do they think has happened, the old fools, to make them like this? Do they somehow suppose it's more grown up when your mouth hangs open and drools and you keep on pissing yourself and can't remember who called this morning? Or that, if they only choose, they could alter things back to when they danced all night, or went to their wedding, or sloped arms some September? Or do they fancy there's really been no change, and they've always behaved as if they were crippled or tight, or sat through days of thin, continuous dreaming, watching light move? And if they don't, and they can't, it's strange. Why aren't they screaming? At death, you break up. The bits that were you start speeding away from each other forever, with no one to see. It's only oblivion. True, we had it before, but then it was going to end, and was all the time merging with a unique endeavour to bring to bloom the million-petaled flower of being here. Next time, you can't pretend there'll be anything else. And these are the first signs, not knowing how, not hearing who, the power of choosing gone. Their looks show that they're for it. Ash hair, toed hands, prune face dried into lines. How can they ignore it? Perhaps being old is having lighted rooms inside your head and people in them, acting. People you know, yet can't quite name. Each looms like a deep loss restored, from known doors turning, setting down a lamp, smiling from a stare, extracting a known book from the shelves, or sometimes only the rooms themselves, chairs and a fire burning, the blown bush at the window, or the sun's faint friendliness on the wall, some lonely, rain-ceased midsummer evening. That is where they live, not here and now, but where all happened once. This is why they give an air of baffled absence, trying to be there, yet being here. For the rooms grow farther, leaving incompetent cold, the constant wear and tear of taken breath, and them crouching below extinction's alp, the old fools, never perceiving how near it is. This must be what keeps them quiet, the peak that stays in view wherever we go, for them is rising ground. Can they never tell what is dragging them back and how it will end? Not at night, not when the strangers come, never throughout the whole hideous inverted childhood? Well, we shall find out.
Going. I thought it would last my time. The sense that beyond the towns there would always be fields and farms, where the village louts could climb such trees as were not cut down. I knew there'd be false alarms in the papers about old streets and split-level shopping, but some have always been left so far. And when the old part retreats, as the bleak high-risers come, we can always escape in the car. Things are tougher than we are. Just as Earth will always respond, however we mess it about. Chuck filth in the sea, if you must. The tides will be clean beyond. But what do I feel now? Doubt? Or age, simply? The crowd is young in the M1 cafe. Their kids are screaming for more. More houses, more parking allowed, more caravan sites, more pay. On the business page, a score of spectacled grins approve some takeover bid that entails 5% profit and 10% more in the estuaries. Move your works to the unspoilt dales, grey area grants. And when you try to get near the sea in summer, it seems just now to be happening so very fast. Despite all the land left free, for the first time I feel somehow that it isn't going to last. That before I snuff it, the whole boiling will be bricked in, except for the tourist parts. First slum of Europe. A role it won't be so hard to win with a cast of crooks and tarts. And that will be England gone. The shadows, the meadows, the lanes, the guild halls, the carved choirs. There'll be books. It will linger on in galleries. But all that remains for us will be concrete and tyres. Most things are never meant. This won't be, most likely. But greeds and garbage are too thick strewn to be swept up now, or invent excuses that make them all needs. I just think it will happen soon.
The Card Players. Jan van Hogspew staggers to the door and pisses at the dark. Outside, the rain courses in cart ruts down the deep mud lane. Inside, Dirk Dogsturd pours himself some more and holds a cinder to his clay with tongs, belching out smoke. Old Prick snores with the gale, his skull face firelit. Someone behind drinks ale and opens mussels and croaks scraps of songs towards the ham-hung rafters about love. Dirk deals the cards. Wet, century-wide trees clash in surrounding starlessness above this lamplit cave, where Jan turns back and farts, gobs at the grate, and hits the Queen of Hearts. Rain, wind, and fire, the secret, bestial peace.
The building. Higher than the handsomest hotel, the loosened comb shows up for miles, but see, all round it, close-ribbed streets rise and fall like a great sigh out of the last century. The porters are scruffy. What keep drawing up at the entrance are not taxis, and in the hall, as well as creepers, hangs a frightening smell. There are paperbacks, and tea at so much a cup, like an airport lounge, with those who tamely sit on rows of steel chairs, turning the ripped mags, haven't come far, more like a local bus. These outdoor clothes and half-filled shopping bags, and faces restless and resigned, although every few minutes comes a kind of nurse to fetch someone away. The rest refit, cups back to saucers, cough, or glance below seats for dropped gloves or cards. Humans caught on ground curiously neutral, homes and names suddenly in abeyance. Some are young, some old, but most at that vague age that claims the end of choice, the last of hope, and all here to confess that something has gone wrong. It must be error of a serious sort, for see how many floors it needs, how tall it's grown by now, and how much money goes in trying to correct it. See the time, 11:30 on a working day, and these picked out of it as they climb to their appointed levels, how their eyes go to each other, guessing on the way someone's wheeled past in washed to rags ward clothes. They see him too. They're quiet. To realise this new thing held in common makes them quiet, for past these doors are rooms, and rooms past those, and more rooms, yet each one further off and harder to return from, and who knows which he will see and when. For the moment, wait. Look down at the yard. Outside seems old enough, red brick, lagged pipes, and someone walking by it, out to the car park, free. Then past the gate, traffic, a locked church, short terraced streets where kids chalk games and girls with hairdos fetch their separates from the cleaners. Oh, world, your loves, your chances are beyond the stretch of any hand from here, and so unreal, a touching dream to which we all are lulled but wake from separately. In it conceits and self-protecting ignorance congeal to carry life, collapsing only when called to these corridors. For now, once more, the nurse beckons. Each gets up and goes at last. Some will be out by lunch or 4. Others, not knowing it, have come to join the unseen congregations whose white road lies set apart above. Women, men, old, young, crude facets of the only coin this place accepts. All know they are going to die. Not yet, perhaps, not here, but in the end, and somewhere like this. That is what it means, this clean-sliced cliff, a struggle to transcend the thought of dying. For unless its powers outbuild cathedrals, nothing contravenes the coming dark, though crowds each evening try with wasteful, weak, propitiatory flowers.
Posterity. Jake Palakowski, my biographer, has this page microfilmed. Sitting inside his air-conditioned cell at Kennedy, in jeans and sneakers, he's no call to hide some slight impatient with his destiny. I'm stuck with this old fart at least a year. I wanted to teach school in Tel Aviv, but Myra's folks, he makes the money sign, insisted I got tenure. When there's kids, he shrugs. It's stinking dead, the research line. Just let me put this bastard on the skids. I get a couple of semesters leave to work on protest theatre. They both rise, make for the Coke dispenser. What's he like? Christ, I just told you. Oh, you know the thing, that crummy textbook stuff from freshman psych. Not out of kicks or something happening. One of those old type natural felled up guys.
Dublinesque. Down stucco side streets, where light is pewter, an afternoon mist brings lights on in shops above race guides and rosaries. A funeral passes. The hearse is ahead, but after there follow the troop of streetwalkers in wide flowered hats, leg of mutton sleeves, and ankle-length dresses. There is an air of great friendliness, as if they were honouring one they were fond of. Some caper a few steps, skirts held skilfully. Someone claps time, and of great sadness also. As they wend away, a voice is heard singing of Kitty or Katie, as if the name meant once all love, all beauty.
Homage to a government. Next year we are to bring the soldiers home, for lack of money, and it's all right. Places they guarded or kept orderly must guard themselves and keep themselves orderly. We want the money for ourselves at home, instead of working. And this is all right. It's hard to say who wanted it to happen, but now it's been decided, nobody minds. The places are a long way off, not here, which is all right. And from what we hear, the soldiers there only made trouble happen. Next year, we shall be easier in our minds. Next year, we shall be living in a country that brought its soldiers home for lack of money. The statues will be standing in the same tree-muffled squares and look nearly the same. Our children will not know it's a different country. All we can hope to leave them now is money.
This be the verse. They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man, it deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself.
How distant the departure of young men down valleys, or watching the green shore past the salt-white cordage rising and falling. Cattlemen or carpenters, or keen simply to get away from married villagers before morning. Melodeons play on tiny decks past framed cliffs of water, or late at night, sweet under the differently swung stars, when the chance sight of a girl doing her laundry in the steerage ramifies endlessly. This is being young, assumption of the startled century like new store clothes, the huge decisions printed out by feet inventing where they tread, the random windows conjuring a street.
Sad steps. Groping back to bed after a piss, I part thick curtains, and am startled by the rapid clouds, the moon's cleanliness. 4 o'clock. Wedge-shadowed gardens lie under a cavernous, a wind-picked sky. There's something laughable about this. The way the moon dashes through clouds that blow loosely as cannon smoke to stand apart, stone-coloured light sharpening the roofs below. High and preposterous and separate. Lozenge of love, medallion of art, oh, wolves of memory, immensements. No, one shivers slightly, looking up there. The hardness and the brightness and the plain, far-reaching singleness of that wide stare is a reminder of the strength and pain of being young, that it can't come again, but is, for others, undiminished somewhere.
Solar. Suspended lion face, spilling at the centre of an unfurnished sky. How still you stand, and how unaided, single, stalkless flower, you pour unrecompensed. The eye sees you simplified by distance into an origin, your petalled head of flames continuously exploding. Heat is the echo of your gold. Coined there, among lonely horizontals, you exist openly. Our needs hourly climb and return like angels, unclosing like a hand. You give forever.
Annus Mirabilis. Sexual intercourse began in 1963, which was rather late for me, between the end of the Chatterley ban and the Beatles' first LP. Up till then, there'd only been a sort of bargaining, a wrangle for a ring, a shame that started at 16 and spread to everything. Then all at once the quarrels sank. Everyone felt the same, and every life became a brilliant breaking of the bank, a quite unlosable game. So life was never better than, in 1963, but just too late for me, between the end of the Chatterley ban and the Beatles' first LP.
Vers de Société.
My wife and I have asked a crowd of craps to come and waste their time and ours. Perhaps you care to join us? In a pig's arse, friend. Day comes to an end. The gas fire breathes. The trees are darkly swayed. And so, dear Warlock Williams, I'm afraid. Funny how hard it is to be alone. I could spend half my evenings if I wanted, holding a glass of washing sherry, canted over to catch the drivel of some bitch who's read nothing but witch. Just think of all the spare time that has flown straight into nothingness by being filled with forks and faces rather than repaid under a lamp, hearing the noise of wind and looking out to see the moon thinned to an air-sharpened blade. A life, and yet how sternly it's instilled. All solitude is selfish. No one now believes the hermit with his gown and dish talking to God, who's gone too. The big wish is to have people nice to you, which means doing it back somehow. Virtue is social. Are then these routines playing at goodness, like going to church, something that bores us, something we don't do well, asking that ass about his full research? But try to feel, because, however crudely, it shows us what should be? Too subtle, that. Too decent, too. Oh, hell, only the young can be alone freely. The time is shorter now for company, and sitting by a lamp more often brings not peace, but other things. Beyond the light stand, failure and remorse, whispering, Dear Warlock Williams, why? Of course.
Show Saturday. Grey day for the show, but cars jam the narrow lanes. Inside, on the field, judging has started. Dogs set their legs back, hold out their tails, and ponies, manes repeatedly smoothed to calm heads. Over there, sheep, Cheviot and Blackface. By the hedge, squealing logs, chainsaw competition. Each has its own keen crowd. In the main area, more judges meet by a jeep. The jumping's on next. Announcements, splutteringly loud, clash with the quack of a man with pound notes round his hat and a lit-up board. There's more than just animals. Bead stalls, balloon men, a bank, a beer marquee that half-screens a canvas gents, a tent selling tweed, and another jackets. Folks sit about on bales like great straw dice. For each scene is linked by spaces not given to anything much, where kids scrap, freed, while their owners stare different ways with incurious faces. The wrestling starts, late. A wide ring of people, then cars, then trees, then pale sky. Two young men in acrobats' tights and embroidered trunks hug each other, rock over the grass, stiff-legged in a two-man scrum. One falls, they shake hands. Two more start, one grey-haired. He wins, though. They're not so much fights as long immobile strainings that end in unbalance, with one on his back, unharmed, while the other stands smoothing his hair. But there are other talents. The long high tent of growing and making, wired-off wood tables past which crowds shuffle, eyeing the scrubbed spaced extrusions of earth. Blanched leeks like church candles. 6 pods of broad beans, one split open. Dark shining-leafed cabbages. Rows of single supreme versions. Followed on laced paper mats by dairy and kitchen. 4 brown eggs, 4 white eggs, 4 plain scones, 4 dropped scones. Pure excellencies that enclose a recession of skills. And, after them, lambing sticks, rugs, needlework, knitted caps, baskets, all worthy, all well done, but less than the honeycombs. Outside, the jumping's over. The young ones thunder their ponies in competition twice round the ring. Then trick races, musical stalls, sliding off, riding bareback, the ponies dragged to and fro for bewildering requirements, not minding. But now, in the background, like shifting scenery, horse boxes move, each crawls towards the stock entrance, tilting and swaying, bound for far-off farms. The pound note man decamps. The car park has thinned. They're loading jumps on a truck. Back now to private addresses. Gates and lamps in high stone one-street villages empty at dusk, and side roads of small towns, sports finals stuck in front doors, allotments reaching down to the railway. Back now to autumn, leaving the ended husk of summer that brought them here for show Saturday. The men with hunters, dog-breeding, wool-defined women, children all saddle-swank, mug-faced middle-aged wives glaring at jellies, husbands on leave from the garden, watchful as weasels, cartooning curt-haired sons. Back now, all of them, to their local lives, to names on vans and business calendars hung up in kitchens, back to loud occasions in the corn exchange, to market days in bars, to winter coming, as the dismantled show itself dies back into the area of work. Let it stay hidden there like strength, below sale bills and swindling. Something people do, not noticing how time's rolling smithy smoke shadows much greater gestures. Something they share that breaks ancestrally each year into regenerate union. Let it always be there.
Money. Quarterly, is it? Money reproaches me. Why do you let me lie here wastefully? I am all you never had of goods and sex. You could get them still by writing a few cheques. So I look at others, what they do with theirs. They certainly don't keep it upstairs. By now they've a second house and car and wife. Clearly money has something to do with life. In fact, they've a lot in common, if you inquire. You can't put off being young until you retire, and however you bank your screw, the money you save won't, in the end, buy you more than a shave. I listen to money singing. It's like looking down from long French windows at a provincial town. The slums, the canal, the churches, ornate and mad in the evening sun. It is intensely sad.
Cut grass. Cut grass lies frail. Brief is the breath mown stalks exhale. Long, long the death it dies in the white hours of young-leafed June, with chestnut flowers, with hedges snow-like strewn, white lilac bowed, lost lanes of Queen Anne's lace, and that high builded cloud moving at summer's pace.
The explosion. On the day of the explosion, shadows pointed towards the pit head. In the sun the slag heap slept. Down the lane came men in pit boots, coughing earth-edged talk and pipe smoke, shouldering off the freshened silence. One chased after rabbits, lost them, came back with a nest of lark's eggs, showed them, lodged them in the grasses. So they passed in beards and moleskins, fathers, brothers, nicknames, laughter, through the tall gate standing open. At noon there came a tremor. Cows stopped chewing for a second, sun, scarfed as in a heat haze, dimmed. The dead go on before us. They are sitting in God's house in comfort. We shall see them face to face. Plain as lettering in the chapels it was said, and for a second wives saw men of the explosion, larger than in life they managed, gold as on a coin, or walking somehow from the sun towards them, one showing the eggs unbroken.
Thank you to all our members, trustees, honorary vice presidents and our president, and friends from outside of the society for all the time spent on making recordings and being incredibly patient with me. Thank you also to Simon Galloway for not only recording a poem, but giving me so much technical help. Our readers were Dale Salwak, Carol Collinson, Clarissa Hard, Gavin Hogg, Martin Jennings, Alan Johnson, Andrew Motion, Kate Romano, David Quantick and Thwaite, R.M. Healy, Graham Chesters, Trevor Norwood, Chris Stewart, Kath Sked, Blake Morrison, Rosie Millard, Stuart Lee, Rachel Galletley, Philip Pullen, Simon Galloway, Devon Allison and Vicky Foster. I've added some more information about our speakers in the show notes and some links to further reading and relevant publications. Anne Thwaite very kindly recorded her memories of the launch of High Windows, which she attended with Anthony Thwaite, as personal friends of Larkin, of course. So please keep listening to hear that. So a couple of quick plugs for two upcoming events. On the weekend beginning Friday the 13th of September, Kate Romano will be hosting a Philip Larkin weekend at the amazing Stapleford Granary just south of Cambridge. Gavin and I will be there, as will Phil Pullen, and I'm sure more PLS members. After that weekend, on the Saturday 21st of September, Chris Stewart and I will be running an event in Hull. It's called Some Dappled Park, a poetry writing workshop inspired by Philip Larkin's Hull. And there are actually 2 bursary assisted places available for this. So if you're interested in either of those events, have a look in the show notes, the booking details are there, and thank you for all your support.
I am glad this podcast celebrates the publication of High Windows 50 years ago in the summer of 1974. Anthony and I were there at a special lunch in a private room in the Garrick Club, arranged by Charles Monteith. He was our host, and we each got copies of the new book. They were passed round for all 10 of us to sign with Philip. Presumably he had chosen the guests, and I was glad to see John Betjeman across the table. It was a happy occasion. No one could have imagined it would be Philip's last book, though he lived for another 11.5 more years. And now for my choice, The Building. It is rather a long and difficult poem to read, with each stanza linked closely to the next one across the gap. But it seems appropriate for someone of 91. It's too late to begin afresh. I am actually reading from the first collected poems Anthony edited in 1988, on page 191. That is the one with the very long introduction and the date of each poem printed below it. I like it because the wonderful ending doesn't trail over to a third page. Anthony and I quoted those wasteful, weak, propitiating flowers whenever we visited someone in hospital. In the later collected poems, first printed in 2003, The Building is on page 136. Perhaps not everyone realised that there are 2 very different collected poems, and certainly no one but me realises how many hundreds of days over the years Anthony devoted to Philip's work. Not only the poems, of course, but the 2 volumes of letters, further requirements, and much earlier to that wonderful volume of tributes in Larkin at 60. Anthony never regretted that time spent much as I know he would like to be remembered most as himself a poet, not only as a critic and editor.
This podcast was produced by me, Lynn Lockwood, and Gavin Hogg, and the music was The Horns of the Morning by Wes Finch and the Mechanicals Band. If you have any questions or ideas for future topics, then please, as ever, do get in touch.
The horns of the morning are blowing, are shining. The meadow is wet with the coldest of dew. The dawn reassembles with a clash of gold cymbals. The sky hangs its bands out, the sun hangs in view. Here where no love is, all that was hopeless and kept me from sleeping is pale and unsure, but never so brilliant, neither so silent, nor so unearthly as earth grown before. Never so brilliant, neither so silent.